help us understand it all. And so, several big topics again today, but the biggest of that is the Trump Putin talk. Tell us a bit about what should we understand. What did they talk? It was, I guess, it was a very long talk.
Yeah, they went on for an hour and a half, and given that both of them like to hear each other's, uh, like to hear themselves speak, I can imagine why it went on too long. But there's been a couple of specific items. One was prisoner exchange between an American school teacher attached to the diplomatic educational center in Russia, Mark Fogel, who was released in exchange for a notorious Russian cyber criminal. So at least there's some consistency in U.S. politics. Just like the Biden administration, Trump continues the proud tradition of exchanging civilians for really, really notorious criminals, at least with Russia. So so that's one item of the agenda. The major talking point was, of course, the arrangements for meetings concerning the peace process in Ukraine. But from the looks of it, none of the discussed meetings involve Ukraine itself, so I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. In principle, Putin agreed to that process, but sure, well, shouldn't he? He'd be getting all the accolades for getting into the room with the US president and not having to meet with Zelensky. So, of course, he'd be happy, but of course, previously he wouldn't agree even to that much, and Russia kept rejecting even those US overtures. Now, US has a lot more leverage. Russia has suffered significant losses in Syria, on the battlefields in Ukraine, in Kursk, and on the energy field, especially now with the US pumping up energy oil, and India actually also moving to US based purchases in addition to the Gulf oil that it has already been shifting to for some time. So Russia is weak on many fronts, and this would be a good opportunity to take advantage of that. However, it looks like so far it's going to be a rather one-sided conversation. The official meeting is supposed to take place sometime in the near future in Saudi Arabia, which is an interesting choice, especially since considering that allegedly the special envoy Witkov was had a touchdown in Moscow the other day. There's some discussion that it might be tied to energy talks related to Saudis and Russia in coming up with some arrangements given U.S. shift in policy on energy. So that could be a reason to tie in these alleged Ukraine discussions into a larger framework related to unrelated or semi-related issues and broader economic and energy concerns. Trump also mentioned that he might be meeting Putin in Washington at the White House, or he could travel to Moscow, or both. None of that has been finalized. It doesn't sound like a particularly great idea in any case, but we've been seeing a lot of changes around Washington, and meetings that were supposed to happen, such as with Egypt's President Sisi, were called off. So none of this at the end could happen as well, depending on how things go. However, there are two things going on simultaneously with this process. First, the Defense Secretary Hegseth claimed that Ukraine will not be getting its territories back, and essentially, at best, he seems to be pushing for frozen conflict or a major territorial concession from Ukraine without giving any lever regarding Russia and what Ukraine could demand from Russia in return, which was a very strange opening to a peace discussion. US has a lot of leverage to push Russia at the moment. It can give a lot of weapons to Ukraine. The fact that the defense secretary is starting on that note raised a lot of eyebrows. The other is that there was another high-level meeting in Ukraine with the Treasury Secretary regarding the rare earths deal, which would have basically Ukraine paying for additional U.S. support with rare earths that U.S. needs to counter China, particularly in the defense industry, and also for AI semiconductor development as well. So that seems to be going pretty well, and I think there will be a positive result regarding that. At the time, all of these things are happening simultaneously, and they're somewhat connected to each other, but there is no clear pattern yet, and there doesn't seem to be a very clear strategy yet. It doesn't seem like the administration has finalized what it wants to see out of these next discussions and on what terms.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. There is so much to understand from this, so much to see what is being seen and also not being seen. But first, let me understand why 1.5 hour meeting. Miss, does Trump know Russian? He must be knowing it certainly. I know there are interpreters, but just in this manner, I want to understand. Means why normally 1.5 hour meetings doesn't take place before a formal meeting.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation, because I'm not. To me, Russia's, especially lately, has been acting in a way that's kind of haphazard. They've invited all these North Koreans who keep dying. Um, they are trying to. They suffered big losses. They've taken in a war criminal, Assad, into the as a refugee. Um, None of these things are particular, and we are now seeing that there's financial shenanigans with Turkey over Russian monetary exchanges. Trump also threatened BRICS shortly before coming into office. It's possible that he also touched on some of these commercial and economic issues that are concern U.S. interests, but and of course, the conflict with Ukraine remains a top priority on the agenda, as well as that one remaining U.S. citizen. But it does beg the question of why he seems to be spending more time with somebody who is an adversary than in some meetings with more friendly countries, and whether US is actually getting anything out of this process. Sure, it would be great to come to some conclusion to warfare. Nobody wants to see more bloodshed, but not if it advances major security risks that will later need to be picked up by some future administration.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's look at the watchers. How do you think Zelensky must be watching this? Because I read some news reports and very quickly I could understand that it looks like, it will be not fully, not all the Ukrainian territory will go back if at all there is a peace process in place coming up. So I want to understand how do you think Zelensky must be watching this? It is his issue, but he seems to be very much out of the issue itself himself.
Well, Zelensky just made his own territorial swap proposal, which would liberate the territories in Kursk in Russia, taken over by Ukrainian military in exchange for Russia getting out of the Ukrainian territories that they are occupying, which seems to be like a fair end to the conflict. Additionally, it would be good if Russia could be obligated by the international community to pay reparations for the damage they caused after violating international law. That could be a beginning of a discussion. But so far, no one is addressing these claims directly, and in fact, there's been some very strange claims floating about that Trump had at some point proposed that he could take over those territories in Ukraine taken over by Russia in exchange for some economic arrangements with Ukraine, which seems awfully like the proposal he also made to the North Korean dictator Kim, which did not quite work out, and the controversial Gaza uh, takeover proposal that he suggested in during his meeting with Netanyahu, and that's been front page coverage since then.
Absolutely, absolutely. Trump is talking a lot about land from Panama to Greenland to Canada to Gaza to perhaps in Ukraine. Be that what do you think, you know, Ukrainians must be also looking at it the same way Zelensky must be looking? Or do you
Yes,
think Ukrainian will be looking at it, it's the end of the war?
I don't think they would be happy with anything less than Russia being compelled either by military force or by political agreement to leave and not come back, at the very least, to say nothing of reparations, reconstruction, and all of that. Because A, there's a clear violation of international law. B, Russia is actually not in a winning position. They've been sending wave attacks of human beings, but they've also been sending horses, donkeys, bicycles, little carts, and even now two-humped camels, believe it or not. So, so this war is starting to look less like World War II or World War One, and more like ancient battles. Maybe elephants they'll get some from somewhere, and they'll send them in next. So, meanwhile, Ukraine's been displaying their own developed, highly sophisticated laser weapons, and they've been at the forefront of groundbreaking technologies that the Pentagon said, including drones, that the Pentagon said they would be replicating in the US in the future. So it seems to me that, yes, sure, Russia has more people to send to be killed, but that alone is not necessarily the way of the war. Should, if Ukraine receives a bit more assistance, in particular long-range attackers that they could use to continue destroying Russian economic and energy infrastructure, I think they will be well placed to negotiate on their own terms.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to understand now, in terms of China, how would China be looking at it? How do you think North Korea would be looking at it? Now they have lost soldiers, and the way Trump is planning his policies in Ukraine, does he look like to be on the side of Russia, in the side of Ukraine, on the side of Europe, on the side of NATO, or on the side of peace? How does it all look like? Help us understand these whole dynamics.
So, in terms of North Korea, they see the situation as an opportunity. They're selling massive amounts of weapons to Russia. They lost, over 10,000 soldiers, it looks like it, but they sent more into the battle, and for them, they're actually more concerned about their international standing than about those soldiers killed, which is a relatively small number. In the meantime, they are opening diplomatic doors with an increasing number of countries. Some of them are just Russia's allies from various pariah states from around the world, like Nicaragua and Taliban in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, you also have European countries that are increasingly open to some sort of normalization with North Korea, which is, from an economic perspective, from intelligence perspective, is a huge breakthrough from North Korea, and all they had to do is wait it out until Russia was weakened without having to change anything about their own mode of behavior. So they're getting a lucky break here. China is not happy about Russia becoming a weak link in this whole chain because it puts more pressure on them. But on the other hand, they see potential opportunities in reconstruction in Ukraine. None of what happened has affected its own interests regarding the South China Sea and Taiwan. And largely, they're getting away unscathed from the whole debacle. Their trade continues. Russia is becoming more dependent on them, which gives them more leverage for the future. So they're watching to wait to happen, and as soon as they see the wind shift, they will probably recalibrate their strategy accordingly without ever fully leaving the pro-Russian bloc, but also looking to capitalize on the economic side of things as much as possible from whatever angle they can. Regarding Trump, now he was very indignant when one of the reporters in the briefing asked him why he's not supporting Ukraine. But in reality, if you look at the politics of it, today, a lot of things happened that don't particularly point in a pro-Ukraine or even a pro-peace direction, because you can't really negotiate the peace with one side. It takes two to tango, as they say, at the very least. And Defense Secretary Hexat's comments that Ukraine will not be joining NATO, that Ukraine will not be getting more security guarantees from the US, that Ukraine will not be getting its territories back. It sounds an awful lot like a complete capitulation to Russian demands, and nothing like a reasonable compromise, pragmatic deal, or even a start to a negotiation process from a position of strength. This is a giveaway. This is not a negotiation based on his comments. I don't know what to make of it unless there are some other deals going on behind the scenes that Russia is making economic offers that for whatever reason sound more promising than whatever Ukraine has to offer. And Ukraine has a lot to offer, but who knows? And there's no way to know because obviously nobody released the full 90-minute phone call transcript. They just released a very brief summary that Trump mentioned those talking points. We don't know what discussions are taking place in the background, but the picture of it seems to be favoring Russia far more heavily than what U.S. leverage would need it to be at this point in the game.
Right, right. So my feeling is that, does it look good for the future with a whole nation feeling that they have got nothing out of, protecting themselves, losing so many men and losing so much of out of this whole war? And does it mean that Ukraine will always hold that grudge if it works this way only in the future? This is not good for the world. This is not good for the US, if I see it from that point of view.
It's not good for the US, it's not good for Ukraine, and it's not good for NATO or any other European relationships, frankly, any relationships with the US, because they'll be all looking at the fact that US had made Ukraine give up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. So they have an international obligation to guarantee Ukraine security. They have not kept up the end of the bargain at all, and now they're reneging even on the on those legal manifestations. They're abandoning an ally in need to a country that is, quite frankly, not very sympathetic. It may be useful uh, due to cheaper prices or abundant metals or good deals that people can make, but from a moral, ethical, security perspective, any perspective outside pure transactional uh, arrangements, Russia is not a country that many people sympathize with unless they are directly in its sphere of influence. So I don't really see um, what will happen. It has sent those Indians it literally lied to die on the front lines. It has engaged in very nasty campaigns. The moment any of its allies go to have even a discussion with somebody else, we've seen what happened when Prime Minister Modi decided to travel to France and the United States. Um, I don't know what Russia expects a leader of such a huge and great country and nation to do, sit at home and wait for Putin's visits. I mean, yeah, instead of going and meeting other leaders around the world. But the feedback was not positive, so they're not really earning goodwill through anything other than playing on anti-Western sentiment. Unfortunately, when US is showing a weak side, they're giving leverage to such countries. They're giving leverage and an opportunity for other countries to fill the void and to say, why should you trust the US? They can't keep even basic commitments. They can't even do the minimum that their budget, that their visibility in the world, that their population can allow. So if they can't even do the minimum, if they can't play the role that a country with such resources is expected to play, how are they even a superpower? So from arguing whether we're a unipolar world, a bipolar world, a multipolar world, we'll be in a no polar world with the US completely outside the picture in no time if we continue down this road.
Absolutely, absolutely. So much so we'll have to keep watching how this all pans out, how the final thing is. These are just the initial things, and we'll have to see how and what things actually happen on the ground. But hope everyone, peace prevails in all amicable terms, so that it not does not leave room for much more conflicts in the future, whichever it is. An individual hurt is different than a country feeling hurt for a long, long period of time. That's a difference we have seen in history. We should not be looking at something more like that, whichever it